This is breaking news from 4 News Now.
Good morning, I'm Rob King with 4 News Now. We have new details in the Moscow murders investigation as the long-awaited affidavit with probable cause has been released. And to discuss some of the details of what was in that affidavit, we're gonna speak to the person who knows most things in this building, and that is our news director, Melissa Luck. Melissa, thank you for hopping on real quick. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, Rob. There are people who know much more than me. I've just been around maybe almost the longest. So, and we do have, reporters down in Moscow covering this and what's going on in court today. They are very busy with what's happening in court and outside of court. So, so I'm not trying to steal their thunder. I just thought, if we can just kind of talk about the court documents and what is in them, what we learned today, and then I think you'll catch up with our real reporters here soon.
Absolutely. It's 19 pages. It's a lot to digest. I'm sure you've read it multiple times, but your first reading, what were some of the big takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, these are long documents and they get a little tedious, especially if you haven't read them before, because, they obviously have to lay out really specific evidence, a really specific case. The two biggest takeaways for me, actually, there's three. There's more than that, but the biggest ones, I think it's heart-wrenching to hear that one of the surviving roommates saw this man in their home that morning. She described, hearing some noises, wasn't sure what it was, and looked out in the hallway and saw a man in black in a mask walking towards her and walking out towards the back door. And she mentioned that she went into her room and locked the door and was frozen in shock. That breaks my heart. There's a lot of questions online. Why did she do that? Why didn't she call 911? Why didn't she? I don't know. And I don't think any of us could even guess. None of us have been in that position. I don't think your first assumption, even if you do see someone in your house in the middle of the night, is that they just killed 4 people. So that was startling to me. But what's interesting about that is it did help pinpoint a lot of things that led to an arrest in this case. It helped pinpoint the time, because she knew what time it was that happened, and they could then, look at security cameras and look for a car. She also got a little bit of a description of the person and said that he was athletically built, but not muscular, and had bushy eyebrows. And that sounds like a small thing, but then, that was just one more thing that they could connect as they found who they believed was their suspect later down the line.
Yeah,
so
the officer who wrote the affidavit did note that Kohberger has bushy eyebrows, and that was a specific detail that the roommate mentioned. And yeah, you might think it's trivial, but it actually helped connect dots for the police.
That's right. All of these things add up in the end, right? By themselves, they're circumstantial, but all of them help build a case. So that struck me the most. That just really kind of like had a sinking feeling in my stomach when I read that. The next thing that struck me and is probably one of the most significant is the DNA match. So we learned in the affidavit that was just unsealed today that the killer left behind a knife sheath at the crime scene. We knew all along that they had said that this was a fixed blade, K-bar type knife. I think most of us assumed, and in part it was because of the nature of the wounds on the victims, but it was also because they had the sheath that was left there. And it was a DNA sample that was left on the snap of that knife sheath that allowed them to later make this connection. So the DNA connection, and that DNA connection there's a lot of questions surrounding that right now that we're not going to know the answers to. But ultimately what happened was, 2 months later, when they had Brian Kohberger as a suspect, agents in Pennsylvania took trash from his parents' garbage. The Idaho State Crime Lab tested it and found, this familial match. So again, that's not the entire case. It's just one more piece. But, there's a lot of talk about, this killer coming and going, and this being like, a crime scene that didn't leave a lot of evidence behind. There was a key piece of evidence, and that's kind of what we probably all expected. We didn't know what it was going to be, but that was significant. So those are the two biggest things that stand out to me. The way they track the car and all those things are fascinating, and and again, it reads like in a tedious way if you're just reading the affidavit, but boy, it shows the police work that our officers were doing when they weren't saying much to us, but behind the scenes, they were really building a case.
Yeah, one of the ways they even saw the car was on a license plate reader in Colorado. So it goes to show that they can really take all these different aspects and connect them and paint a pretty clear timeline of what they suspect happened.
Well, and what's interesting about that is, if you read it and you haven't read a lot of these, you might be thinking like, well, what does that prove? That he, was in the license plate in Colorado and that he was driving the car in Indiana that was pulled over. What do all these things prove? Well, they're trying to prove over and over that this was the vehicle that was seen at the crime scene. It was a white Elantra with no front license plate. And then it was, linked to someone at Washington State University. And then, so having it be in Colorado, it's like they're just building like, okay, the same person's driving the car there. So they have him with surveillance driving the car in Pennsylvania. So it's, again, just building that, this wasn't like, the objection could be, well, maybe somebody took his car or maybe, whatever. But what they're trying to do is just build that this person or a person matching this description was in this car the entire time. The cell phone records are really, really interesting. In fact, I read this really quickly this morning as I was writing a story for the website. So I've read a lot of court documents. I kind of do a fair amount of, a little bit of a skim to try to get, let's pick out the important things. And one thing I missed, they talked about how they had, a cell phone registered to Brian Kohberger that left Pullman at 2 a.m, I believe, the morning of the murders. Mm-hmm. And then it leaves Pullman and then there's no cell phone transmission. So they say either that there's no cell phone service in the area where the phone is, or it was turned off or put into airplane mode. There's cell phone service in the area where the crime's committed. We know that.
Sure.
There just is. It's a populated area, right? And then it turns back on when the phone returns back to Pullman at like 5 a.m. What I missed the first time around, and someone just pointed this out to me on Twitter, is that phone was back at or near the crime scene at 9:30 that morning. The crime scene hadn't been discovered yet.
After the murders had taken place, though. They suspect in that 4 or 5 o'clock a.m. window. So the suspected killer would have gone back to the crime scene.
At least the phone was at the crime scene 2.5 hours before 911 was called. It's really chilling.
Right.
It's just, there's a lot of questions that still remain about this, but the details that are starting to fill in paint a pretty scary picture. It was going to be a scary picture anyway, right? We know, we have 4 young people that were killed, but just this idea too that there's surveillance cameras everywhere. It was a really interesting information about, once the surviving roommate could say when she saw this person in the house, then they went and looked for video all around it, right? And they found a surveillance camera that's 50 feet from one of the people's bedrooms that picked up the sound of like a whimper and a thud and the dog barking at 4:17 a.m, I believe. Then they can look at that, and then that's when they started to look, okay, what else are we seeing here? We're seeing the car. Now, where else was the car? And that car drove by that house 4 times that morning.
Multiple back and forth. So they noted right. Just down King Street and through that kind of surrounding neighborhood as well.
Right. And people keep talking about that being a busy area for students, but they even said it's not a busy area for cars at 4 a.m. It's just It's quiet at that point. So anyway, there's so much there when it comes to kind of how they built this case, but we still don't know the question, like really the question everybody wants to know is why. That's what people always want to know. Mm-hmm. I don't think you ever really get a good sense of why anybody would do something like this to these 4 innocent people, but that information is not in this affidavit. It doesn't explain why they think these people may have been targeted, what they think connects Kohberger specifically to these people, other than the car and the phone and the time and place. But they don't get into that, and that is something that's going to come out over the course of the investigation. But more information was released today than I frankly was expecting. Mm-hmm. I've covered Idaho courts for 20 years. The judges have a lot of discretion as far as sealing cases and that kind of thing. And I kept telling people, don't expect you're going to see everything the morning that he appears in court. And there was a lot more than I expected this morning.
So do you think that's because of the high profile nature of this case? They decided to release more details, or?
I don't think so. I think I'll give you a 2-sided answer there. I don't think judges care particularly about that as far as what information they're going to be allowed to be released in that way. In fact, a lot of times the more high profile, the more they want to keep things close, right? Because they have to find a
like
jury
the gag order that's been issued on this case.
Right. What they did that's different, that is just becoming kind of a thing in Idaho courts, is there's this website called the Idaho Cases of Judicial Interest. And I had never seen that used until there's a case, a Planned Parenthood case against the state of Idaho on their abortion law that's been going through the Idaho State Supreme Court. And those documents have all been uploaded there. And that's been really, really helpful. It's hard to get court documents online from most places. And that has made that process easier. And then there was a lawmaker from down in the Lewiston area that was accused of rape. They started putting all his court documents online. This is only the third case. And then the Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow case, which is a massive public interest case. They've put them there. So this is the first case that's super local to our area that I've seen that. So I think they did that because it keeps people from calling the clerk's office and going to the clerk's office. There's only a few clerks working in the Latah County Courthouse. They're super busy with other cases. So I think the high profile nature is what caused them to put it on that site and make it a little bit more accessible. But as far as allowing the release of specific information, that's judge's discretion. So, and I'm not familiar with this judge. So I don't know if that's something that's just a little bit more likely in her court. There is the gag order in place that I think some major news agencies are going to try to fight that, believing that it's too broad. But we've had high profile cases in this area before too. And I never pretend to guess what the Idaho judges are going to do.
Right. So where do we kind of go from here? Kohberger did have his first appearance this morning. What are some of the next steps?
Yeah, so the first appearance happened 9:30 this morning. In fact, we just got the video back. It was pretty uneventful as far as court appearances go. It was a very typical first appearance. What happens at a first appearance in Idaho is they just read the charges against someone, make sure they understand, make sure counsel is appointed, which we know that had already happened. And so the next step is they prepare for a preliminary hearing. And that's unusual. At least they don't do this in Washington. I don't know about other states, but in Idaho, it's almost like a mini trial of sorts. And it's supposed to happen within the first 14 days. And the state has to prove they have enough to go forward to trial. So they can call witnesses, they can submit evidence, they can, it really is like a mini trial. Defendants can and often do waive the preliminary hearing. I expect, again, I do not presume to guess everything that's going to happen in an Idaho court. I presume that they will probably waive the prelim because, they can lay out and say, here's, we all have seen the affidavit of probable cause. So they just look at that. And I think the defense will probably say, okay, we're good to waive that. But it can also be delayed, that kind of thing. So that's the next legal step. And then after that is when they enter a plea. The arraignment in a lot of places happens closer to the first appearance. In Idaho, it happens after they determine there's enough to go to trial in the first place. It is going to be a long, tedious process. These are not fast. I had people say on Twitter, like, well, what if he pleads guilty at his arraignment? Well, judges almost won't even let you do that in a lot of cases because they need to make sure you understand exactly what you're pleading guilty to. So we're looking at, ballpark a year at least before this goes to trial. There's hearings that happen in between, discovery hearings, evidentiary hearings, that kind of thing that the national media will probably long be gone by the time those things happen. And those are
we'll still be here.
We will because I know there's going to be a lot of public interest, but it's going to be a while. There's a chance that this could end up being a capital case. Idaho, a first-degree murder is punishable by life in prison or the death penalty in Idaho.
And he faces 4 separate counts of first-degree murder.
Right. It is extremely rare at this point. There's only 8 people on death row in Idaho. They haven't executed anyone in Idaho in 10 years. They had an execution actually scheduled for last month, for a few weeks ago, and they called it off because the State Department of Corrections says they can't get the proper chemicals to carry out the lethal injection. So I don't know. We had there's one person on death row in Idaho who killed a Kootenai County police officer. That's the most recent death penalty case that we've had in this area. But if it's a capital case, that makes things take even longer. So I think people need to be patient. I think people need to remember what this is about. And it's really about these 4 people and how even harder this is going to be for the families going forward as this information comes out. They have a lot of questions, but the legal process itself is going to start to slow down at this point.
Sure. Now that this kind of big dump of evidence and information has been released, it'll take time for all parties involved to process that. If viewers want to read the affidavit for themselves, where can they do that?
There is I don't know that we've linked it to our article. I didn't do that from home this morning, which I should have, which I will after this. So you just set me up for some more work. But,
perfect.
Like I said, it is on this public site. You don't have to have an account. You don't have to pay for it. it's really nice. The more publicly available public records, the better, I believe. But it's, if you just Google Idaho cases of judicial interest, but we have the story on our front page right now about what's in the affidavit. And as soon as we're done, I will go link it to that website. It crashed this morning. The server went down. You couldn't get to it. There was so much interest. The same thing happened with the jail roster last night. People were trying to look at his booking photo. That crashed. So, if you want to look at this information, be patient. But I'll link that to our story as well.
Okay, good. That's helpful. And that'll be at the top of KXLY.com if you want to go read that and get that link. Melissa, we have our reporters, as you mentioned, out working on this. What are some of the stories they're going to be looking at, some of the angles they're going to discuss today?
Yeah, what we know, at least right now, and the day is going to change as we go. We've got Jordan Smith was in the courtroom this morning, so he will be able to kind of show and tell what happened. We also, as a news agency, look for ways to educate people about the criminal justice system when things like this happen, because most people never are exposed to the criminal justice system. So he'll kind of explain what happened today. His story will talk a little bit more about what's in that affidavit, what we know today about the case that we didn't know yesterday. Esther Bauer is down there just really trying to talk to some people now that this information is out. That's been really tricky. I think some neighbors told one of our reporters yesterday they've been burned on TikTok throughout this. So obviously they're not really excited about going on camera. And then Emily Bloom is heading down with one of our photographers, and they're going to kind of just walk through. They're going to drive through kind of where the car was that night, what this suspected path was for this white Elantra, where it was and what they learned at each point of that. So we know that's what we're doing for sure at this point. We're working with our partners at ABC News, so waiting to see what they come out with. The Gonsalves family was in court today. I'm not positive about the other victims' families. I wasn't there, but their attorney came out and made a statement, but Steve Gonsalves chose not to. So we're just going to chase things as they come, again, just to try to give people the most information that we can in the most responsible way possible, because we know that people really want information, and I want to make sure they have factual information. So that's kind of our mission today.
Absolutely. And all those stories will be available 4 News Now at 5 p.m. tonight. We're going to have team coverage on this for a while, I assume. So, Melissa, thank you. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I was just going to say, again, we hope that this process, that people are interested in this case because of the victims. And I understand that, and we should be thinking about their families. And but also, if you have questions about the criminal justice system, why is this happening? Why is this not happening? Where can we see this? Please ask, whether you email us or reach out to us on Twitter or reach out to us on Facebook or whatever you want to do. If you want to understand, we really, really want to help people understand how this process is going to work. They're going to be meticulous. They want a conviction in this case. So we're happy to answer any of those questions. And I've been defending our coverage online today, which I always welcome the feedback. And if people have issue with how we've covered something or want to know why, please reach out to me directly as well. We're not always going to get it right. We're going to do our best. But for us, as you mentioned, Rob, this is a local story. These are local families. This is a local university. These are local communities that are impacted. So we will stay on top of it and just do our best to bring people responsible coverage that helps them understand the process.
Awesome. Melissa, way to put a bow on it. I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, so thank you for allowing us to do this kind of debrief of what we learned today. Again, you'll be able to see all the stories that our reporters are working on in 4 News Now at 5 p.m. But for now, live in the KXLY Plus Digital News Center, I'm Rob King, 4 News Now.